Welcome back to the Seeing Red podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Fulse. Follow me on Twitter at GW Fulse. Get my hottest takes throughout the week. This is the Seeing Red podcast. We are in for a new session, a new season of the podcast, season number 3. We're going to be attacking every which way we can what's going on in Austin, what's going on underneath that pink granite dome that we all love so much, and talking about what's moving, what's shaking, and what's getting the attention of the people inside the building, so that you back home can talk to your friends about what's happening in Austin. So I'm going to do my best every week to kind of give you a brief summary of the big things that are happening and try and peek into what's going to happen in the next week. Every Friday, we're going to release a new episode. So like and subscribe this video or this podcast. Make sure you get this dropped into your inbox or however you get notified every Friday morning. So since the last time we talked, we had the election, and then we had the results from the election. Speaker Phelan decided to not run for re-election. He had a really close, if you don't remember, he didn't win his primary outright, and then he went to a runoff, and he won it, but by a few hundred votes. And decided, I guess he didn't think he necessarily had the support, and he swung his support. He left it to an open contest. There were a couple big players, right? There was Representative Cook, a relatively new member of the legislature from Mansfield, which is in the Dallas area, or it's Tarrant County, I believe. So he was backed by, they call themselves the Reform Caucus. I think they're going to be more of the remedial caucus because they're going to get a lot of education this year. So they are putting up David Cook. People who were previously pretty supportive of Speaker Phelan backed Calendars Committee Chair Burrows out of Lubbock. And then some Democrats, a couple dozen, I think, backed a different candidate. The first vote, no one had a majority. And then after on that second vote, Speaker Burrows won the gavel. That was last week. And then they put off the rules debate for a week. They were going to put it off a couple days. Then the people wanted to go to the inauguration. And then as the inauguration was happening in D.C., a good chunk of Texas got hit by an ice storm. And then they did the debate yesterday, and we passed the rules. Now, every time any legislative or parliamentary body decides to starts a new session, they have to adopt rules as a body, and they operate under temporary rules until that time, but they really can't do anything else until those rules are passed. And so that debate was happening today, and there was a lot of contention back in the primary season about the fact that Speaker Phelan allowed Democrats to chair committees. Just as a very brief explainer of how legislation moves. If an author writes a bill, it just doesn't go for a vote right away. It has to be analyzed and looked at. And the way that a lot of different legislative bodies have figured out how to do this is what's called a committee system. So the speaker, given any number of factors, will send a bill to various committees, and they're called like education and ways and means and all this other stuff. So like if a bill's on like education funding, it's going to the education committee. If it's going on criminal justice, it's going to the criminal justice or criminal jurisprudence or whatever committee. So that's like how that stuff works, so that those lawmakers can kind of, they can get an expertise in that given area, and they can really look in on a bill. And then within the committee structure, the chairman, who is selected by the speaker, can then has a lot of power to move legislation, make sure it gets a hearing, so you can get a vote when that process happens, because you can only go through so many at a time. And then also there are subcommittees. So the committee can, depending on what it is, the chair can designate subcommittees where you have even smaller amounts of stuff where he can then designate stuff to go to a subcommittee. Then it comes to, and start that process. So you basically have it redundant. And a lot of people from the remedial caucus ran on this idea of, we don't want Democrat chairs because they're killing conservative bills. They can never point to like a single conservative priority that got killed by a Democrat chair at all. That was it. They couldn't. They just were really mad about it. Hey, makes a decent talking point, I guess. And so they have people wearing ban Democrat chair shirts all last week at the House, all this stuff. So they're in the rules. The rules get published on Wednesday or Thursday morning at around 4:00, and they're in the rules, right, in big black letters. The member of the minority party cannot chair a committee. So, all right, they got their wish. They won. Doesn't matter that Burrows won the speakership. It's getting rid of Democrat chairs. They won the issue. But now they're making up stuff about how this is the worst thing ever. And the remedial caucus really, really hated that was the case. In the rules, the Democrat chairs were in there, and they decided to vote against the rules. Now, they're going to put all sorts of stuff out there. They're trying to explain away why they took this vote to keep Democrat chairs. At the end of the day, they voted to keep Democrat chairs. That's what their vote was. And they're going to have to go back and explain that to the district. And they have a lot of explaining to do. Because if you start talking about what a vice chair does, which is ceremonial for the most part, ceremonial. They're just kind of the most senior Democrat on the committee, and they have the power to designate a couple witnesses for given testimony. Great, they can have some experts come in and do whatever they want, say whatever they want to say. And that's really it. And I think they get like an extra couple staff members, which they're going to probably get from having seniority anyway. That's just the way legislatures work. If you've been there longer, you get a little bit more staff. So they're going to try and say that, oh, this means that Democrats can kill bills. Well, they couldn't kill bills before. They still can't kill bills. If a bill dies, it's probably because it was written poorly. And if you read some of what these people put out, it's not very cogent. But we'll get to that in the weeks as the stuff starts popping up. So these people decided, these remedial people in the remedial caucus or the remedial class of representatives, they got schooled in just every which way today, parliamentarily, politically, public relations. They lost the P's today, and they're not handling it well on Twitter. They're very upset that there's no Democrat chairs anymore, because at the end of the day, it's a grift. And when I say grift, I mean it's a scam. They're just making stuff up because they're trying to make people mad. They want you to be real mad all the time. Get mad, guys, because when you're mad, things can happen. It doesn't really matter that, despite that being one of the issues in the primary, that the main issue in the primary was the fact that Governor Abbott really, really, really wants school choice, and he spent money and went out of his way to make sure that incumbents that supported the amendment to kill that bill in the fourth special session last year, or third, whatever, the people who killed that bill lost their seats. And that there would be people who supported school choice in the legislature this year. That's it. All the other stuff they're trying to run on or whatever else, that's not the issue. They and now they all have a voting record. All these people who didn't have voting records before, they're going to have people running against them. And those people are going to point out the very obvious fact that they voted to keep Democrat chairs. And we'll see how it plays in the primary. Probably not going to go over too well. And that's the reality of it. Whenever you have to take these votes, sometimes there's a lot of nuance to any given situation when it comes to these votes. Maybe you're voting for against an amendment because it's going to kill this bill and it's already included in another bill. You're just trying to move the process along because by adding amendments, you take up time from what other bills can be listened to later. Because here's the dirty secret about some of these reps on the over on the other side of the Republican aisle, that are all about whatever they want to say on Twitter or Facebook. They are the Democrats' best friend because they kill so much good conservative legislation. Like, you have to keep in mind when you talk about like the swamp and the lobby, 90% of the job is killing bills. They're hardly ever, not hardly ever, but like just as a portion of what they're trying to do in order to in their job, it is not to pass a bill. It is to kill bills. And if you can find a tender-hearted person or tender-minded person to go in and add amendments to a bill that might get dinged, that if they vote, Republicans vote to kill the amendment, they might get dinged in the primary, and it gets added to the bill. Well, guess what? Now that bill, it's what's called poison pilled, and now that whole legislation is not going to pass on the floor. That's the kind of games they play, and that's if it gets that far. A lot of times, there's any other procedural ways that anyone in the legislature can pull, and they do all the time. And they are beloved by certain folks who just want to kill legislation, regardless of what the grassroots wants. And that's the real deal. You have to look at it, what they're selling. You have to look at any media organization, including this one. I'm just me. I'm just a guy. But if you're looking at Texas Scorecard or any of these other ones where they have an ideological bent, right? And they're not just informing you, they actually are trying to push certain legislation or certain ideas or whatever. Whenever they're doing that, there is a purpose for why they're talking about that issue. And that purpose isn't just because they want whatever else. They're trying to find things that piss the most people off to get the most clicks so they get ads that way. They also have people who support their organization who want you to hate something. So they're going to do what they can to rouse the rebels. That's why it's called astroturfing, because they're trying to take the grassroots and make something look like a grassroots movement. And the people in the grassroots might think it's a grassroots movement. They might think it's their own idea. But in reality, the organizations and the ideas and the whatever else, it's a public affairs campaign. It's just a large public affairs firm. It's classic DC. And I know because I worked for similar organizations in DC doing it. Like, that is what they're doing. Like, they're doing public pressure, public affairs campaigns. All like, watch the movie. It's more on the lobby side, but Thank You for Smoking is a great kind of primer on the type of stuff behind the scenes that'll happen to a degree. It's a satire comedy, but these people are very excited that I wouldn't say, sorry, I'm not. They're very disappointed that the Republicans, the real Republicans, the ones who are the governing Republicans, just took the issue away from them, because now they have to find something else. And it's real hard to explain to somebody no Democrat vice chairs. Because if you go look at the DC system, is you have a Republican and you have a ranking member. It's the same thing. I think the ranking members have more power in Congress, or especially in the Senate. Like, they have more power than what the vice chairs in Texas have. And that's how that system works. Like, it's a kind of like, they went and did the system that like people were asking for. Oh, you have to give them this. Like, yeah, like the House and the Senate are constitutionally obligated to pass a budget every year. They have to pass a budget. The budget requires 100 votes, right? So you have to work with the opposition a little bit. You have to work with Democrats to a certain extent. And then all the stuff when it comes to tax cuts pretty much requires a constitutional amendment. So if you want to cut taxes, you have to get 100 votes. You have to work with them to a certain degree. And then occasionally Democrats have a good idea. I think it was Donna Howard passed a tax cut on like period products and stuff and other feminine hygiene products, like in diapers. So you don't have to pay sales tax on those items, like we do with groceries in this state. We got rid of taxes on something because Democrats said, "Hey, this is a good idea." Not just because, but a Democrat did it. Led on that side, pretty like very very popular bill. You know, occasionally they have an idea that they're gonna agree on. It happens. So if you're mad because of what happened today, you are probably listening to people who are really just want you to be mad. They just want you to be mad. And that's it. If you're mad about what happened in the state house on Thursday with the rules, then you are just being fed stuff to make you angry all the time. And you're being lied to constantly because they think you're not going to go look into it yourself because it takes a long time to read bills. It takes an even longer amount of time usually to listen to all the debate and follow all this stuff. And you trust them to tell you the truth because it goes with what your gut is that people are out to get you. I don't necessarily know why you think people are out to get you. Maybe because some people probably are. But I got to tell you this. Oftentimes, the people who are closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. And those people are hurting you. And I hope you'll realize that at some point. But if you don't, God bless you. So that's where we sat with what's happened in the past. Now we move on to the next steps. What's going to happen over the next few weeks? Today, the members of the House submitted to the Speaker's office their kind of preferences for what committees they want to be on. There are 30 committees. Some have more bills and more clout than others. Basically, anything to do with budgeting, whether what you spend it on or how you tax it. So either appropriations or ways and means are going to be, or finance are going to be the ones that people are like usually jockeying for the most. But sometimes people have a pet issue they're really, really interested in, whatever else. And these members will serve on multiple committees. I think the kind of standard's three, maybe it's 4. But, people are going to serve on a number of committees. There's 150 members and there's 30 committees. We have a good amount of people on each committee. And we're going to figure out, eventually it'll be released, like who's the chair, who's the vice chair on any given committee. And then, that's when the real game starts. People are still filing legislation. It's going to be interesting to see there are a number of Democrat committees that were abolished in these new rules. So by I say Democrat committees, I mean Democrat chair committees from the 88th session. And what Representative Hunter, who was who was in charge of this process, he worked with a number of people behind the scenes to figure out a set of rules that a lot of people, I guess, besides the remedial folks who just wanted things their way and stormed out of the room. He worked with other folks who, want to actually get down and govern to create those rules. What they did was in the previous sessions, Democrats had some fairly unimportant committees, things like the resolutions committee and things like along that nature. Or they were a really niche topic where people all mostly agree on like veteran affairs type stuff. And they ended up consolidating a bunch of stuff together because they'd only get a few bills assigned to them in any given session. There wasn't that much workload. So they're going to make people work, have a lot of committee sessions to go to. And they're going to send, so they did that. They also created a couple, one's called the Department of Government Efficiency or something of Government Efficiency Committee, which is Doge, which is Elon Musk catchphrase, but or meme coin or whatever. but he's going there. So that's effectively a more empowered sunset committee, or it's just more the sunset. Let's explain what sunset committee is. Basically, every agency in Texas has a sunset date of when it needs to be renewed. And there's a committee outside of the legislature that reviews all sorts of information about, how it's doing and whatever else, and again gives it a report to the legislature. But it can, if the report is bad, it's not doing what's supposed to doing, or it's done what it's supposed to, an agency can be sunsetted, which means closed. I don't exactly know just the pure difference between the two. It's ironic to have a second layer on this, but I think it's mostly experiment in what's happening currently, and it with the kind of government efficiency ethos that's coming in at the federal level and passing it through onto the state level as well. I'm trying to figure it out. So people are going to be jockeying for different committees just based off of that sort of information. And it's going to be interesting to see who ends up on any given committee. We'll talk more about that as we get through the session. But like I mentioned earlier, the big issues for this cycle are probably, the big one's going to be what school choice version of school choice comes out of the legislature. I think my gut is that school choice will pass in the regular session. I don't know if it will, but that's my gut. So school choice will be rip roaring, ready to go. And I believe Senator Crichton's leading the push on the Senate side. I have not read his bill yet, but so there's a Senate version, I believe, that's been posted. I don't think the House version, I don't know who's leading that, has been posted yet or has been filed yet. But effectively, there's going to be one or two bills from each chamber that are the main thing pushing through at this, pushing through the legislature. They're going to end up going to all sorts of negotiations to figure out which version they're going to do. We'll probably end up knowing it more about that as the process goes on, but we probably won't have that voted on until late May, towards the end of session. Other big kind of things people to look out for. The budget fight's always a big one because they're constitutionally obligated. There's all sorts of jockeying for whatever. And that one's just going to always be a big one that we're always going to kind of talk about to some degree or another. There's a lot of talk starting about water infrastructure. I think we're going to see more power production infrastructure as well, based off of the Senate budget. I haven't seen the House budget, but based on those, there's going to be some things that we're really wanting to build out. Texas is anticipating to grow even larger. We keep having people move in, like hundreds of thousands of people a year. And when you have more people come in, you need more power for those people. You need more power for the job those people are going to do. And you're going to need more water for those people to drink. Well, Texas has done a lot of work over the years to expand our water storage infrastructure. But with the rates we're seeing, we're going to have to expand that more, or we're looking into it more. And we have to do more surface water retention, because there's a large issue in a lot of these populated areas of Texas with something called, I think it's pronounced subsidence, where basically if you take groundwater out, the ground lowers. So you can't take out too much groundwater or it destroys the infrastructure on the ground. And there's some places where it's dropped several feet, but for the most part, it's a few inches. It's imagine everyone in an area has foundation issues, not because of natural stuff, but because we're taking too much water out of the ground. And that ends up being much more costly than it is to build water storage. So those are going to be some interesting issues. I don't know if they'll end up popping off and being big, or if we're actually going to find some solutions, but keep an eye on those. And as always, keep an eye on any of the kind of sometimes there are things that happen nationally or in the national news that end up becoming a much larger deal. And that when that happens, when the legislature is in session, some bills that you didn't ever think of become a much bigger deal by the end of the session. So keep that kind of like, so who knows what might pop off over the next few months that might pop up there. Um, but those kind of the big things to have in the back of your mind as you're looking at this session. You have to remember though, this is the session that's going into a statewide election year. It's going into the midterms. And just generally speaking, in my experience in my lifetime, the elections before a statewide tend to be more like meat and potatoes, like government issues, right? We're talking education, we're talking infrastructure, we're talking those sort of things, because people want to run for statewide office and they want to talk about things that they've done for the state any given way. They also don't want to like cause the wrong things to be I mean, not wrong things, politically wrong things, to get on the wrong side of a social issue either way. So it's typically just safer for everyone to be like, we're just going to do this even keel and go into it. And there's a lot of talk about where, and we'll get into this more, probably more after session. But something to keep in mind when you are watching session is that a lot of these people are going to want to run for statewide office in 2 years. Basically anyone who's has senator in front of their name wants to have governor in front of their name, right? Or lieutenant governor, or comptroller, or ad commissioner, or attorney general. And for the most part, incumbents are going to win statewide, even Paxton. So they stay in their seat, they're probably going to win. But a lot of people, I mean, Abbott, Paxton, and Patrick have all been in their seats for 3 terms. So is Miller. Those people, that's combined three people who will have served for 12 years. Some of them might just want to move on. Some of them might not. Who knows at this point? And then a lot of people perceive Senator Cornyn as weak. I don't. I think Cornyn will beat anybody who runs against him. I could be wrong, obviously, but I think I think people underestimate how good he is at what he does as a politician. To their own, whatever. But any number of people, I mean, everyone's talking about Paxton running against Cornyn. That could happen. But if that happens, now you have probably 6 or 8 people running for it who are currently in office. And others, it'll be a lot of people will be jockeying for that seat. That'll be a multi-way seat. Same with if Patrick or Abbott decided not to run. And if you had Cornyn decide not to run, or you have any of these people who've been there for a while decide not to run, it's going to open up the floodgates of people who have not really been able to run for statewide office, who've always wanted to. And they can see this thing might be their only chance, because once you get in there, you might stay there for 12 years, right? So people are playing that calculus in the back of their head, on top of people trying to look at who in their area might be resigning or weak in Congress. All these things are playing a factor. And when you look at some of the decisions some people make, you have to keep that in mind. There's all sorts of conjecture about why would somebody vote for this but not for that. And it's like, sometimes you have to look at it of, they're not trying to win re-election, they're trying to win their next election. And you don't necessarily know what they're running for. So it's just keep that in mind. But it's been a great show today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the trust y'all given me to produce the show and to keep listening and watching every week whenever we're doing this. So I thank you so much. If you haven't, please like and subscribe. It helps me a lot to get this out there. I don't put any money into advertising at this point. That might change. I don't get paid any money by any sponsors. I don't get paid from anybody to do this. I do this on my own dime because I like it. I like talking to you guys. I like keeping up with it. It keeps me sharp. And I think it's something it's my contribution at this point to body politic. If that were to change, if somebody were to step in and say, I'd love to finance or whatever else, I'd disclose it. I've never been paid to say anything on this channel. And God, I'd love it, because it would make, my life a little less friction in my life. But I like doing this. So thank you so much for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Follow on Twitter. Follow on Facebook. And I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Foles. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.